as we wait for everyone to join us, I am going to do a little introduction and some housekeeping. So first of all, welcome to the ABCs of EVs. We're really excited about this presentation. I'm Nicola Brown with the Illinois Solar Education Association, and today giving the presentation we have Jay Futterman, who is one of ICEV's solar ambassadors, and Tim Milburn from Green Ways to Go, who is a little bit of an EV expert. He's been giving presentations about electric vehicles, a number of different environmental groups, and we're really excited to have him here with ISEA. A few pieces of housekeeping. First, if you have any questions, we would appreciate it if you put those in the chat box, and we'll get to those towards the end. And if you have any clarifications as we're answering those questions, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you. And then we also have, as a brief announcement, a raffle going on to support the work that Illinois Solar Education Association is doing. We are raffling off a Tesla Model X. One ticket is 100 or 4 for 300. And it's a really great opportunity to support all the educational work that our organization does. And I will put a link to that website right in the chat box if you would like to go and take a look. I think that is about all that I have. So Jay and Tim, you can go ahead and take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nicola. Thank you all for showing up to be with us tonight, and thank you to ISEA for hosting this webinar. We're going to be talking about the ABCs of EVs. So this here is my car charging up in my driveway during sunnier weather. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I've been driving a Chevy Bolt since 2017. I lease it. I've had solar on my roof since 2016, and after I was driving electric for a couple of years and paying electricity bills, I decided to put more solar panels up. And the 9 panels that you see in the top picture there generate enough electricity through the course of the year to offset all the energy that my car uses. I drive kind of a typical amount, daily commute of 20 to 40 miles. I plug in at home once or twice a week. Very, very rarely do I ever charge out on the road. It's just not something that's necessary. But if I'm at, the grocery store and there's free electricity there at a charging station, I'll take advantage. I think the thing that really hooks me in with electric cars is the driving experience. It's really just totally different than driving a gas-powered car. The acceleration is so much faster and so much smoother, so much quieter. The handling is better because the center of gravity is so low. And I think you'll find most people who drive electric have no interest in going back to a gas mobile. Furthermore, the only maintenance I've ever had to do on my car is just rotate the tires. And in addition to drive, I'm a solar ambassador with ISEA, so I do a lot of talks about solar energy for the home and EV talks, and I've done a number of electric car shows over the past several years.
I'll take it from here. This is Tim Milburn. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I echo everything Jay said about being an enthusiast about electric vehicles. I've had a Chevy Volt since 2014, and I just installed solar on my home last year. This is a drone photo of the car and the new solar panels in warmer weather. I also have a wireless EV charger. It's like a big electric toothbrush where I pull in and I pull over this and charge my vehicle. No plugging in. I've also owned an EV charging installation business since 2012, and I've been an activist in Sierra Club for about 6 or 7 years, focusing a lot on electrification. I do consulting work, and I've done some authoring and educating on transportation electrification. And this is the cover page of a book that was issued last year, working on a project with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. We're trying to get it so the municipalities in particular are ready for the paradigm shift towards electrification. So we're trying to get them up to speed on inspection and permitting and parking lot management and such. So I'm kind of all in.
Okay, so why do we care about plug-in vehicles? Why is there a push to go there? Well, for one, overall, I'd say it's just a better driving and ownership experience, right? Driving the car really makes the difference. But we're all here most likely because we're all fans of solar energy and probably environmentalists. So there's a lot of intellectual reasons as well. So we're changing systemically our thought pattern here from being dependent on petroleum and all the geopolitical issues that come with that and the price fluctuations to making electricity from our own domestic sources. Obviously, climate change is at the forefront of a lot of our minds, and EVs offer transportation with much, much less life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. Air quality is important, and EVs generally have no tailpipe emission. Economic development, EVs, along with the whole green tech, green economy sector, are just amazing opportunities and engines for economic growth and innovation. And also just thinking about the electric grid, our grid in many ways is very antiquated, and there's a real need to modernize the electric grid. And EVs are a great tool to help that process along. And there's a real sustainability challenge in transportation. Talking in terms of carbon dioxide emissions in the world, United States has 5% of the global population, yet we consume 30% of the global energy and generate 28% of the carbon emissions. And we need to find a way to mitigate these greenhouse gas emissions. Now, if you look at the graph here to the right, it used to be that electricity power generation was our biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. But with the onset of renewables and natural gas and the decline of coal, transportation sector is now the greatest contributor, and it's actually been trending up over time. So this is an area that we really need to work on if we're going to confront climate change. All right, so find the electric car here, right? So a lot of people prior to Tesla becoming very popular would have thought, well, sure, it's the one in the top left. That's kind of what people thought of as electric cars, a fancy golf cart. That's a Mitsubishi EV. It's no longer made, but the one in the top right is also an electric car. It's a company called Karma. The bottom left, that is a Chrysler Pacifica minivan. Did you know that they have a plug-in version? It plugs in, you can get 35 miles all electric, and it has a gasoline-powered engine for extending the range. And the bottom right, obviously, that's not an electric car. That's an internal combustion engine pickup truck. But in the next couple of years, there's going to be a whole bunch of electric pickups that are going to be hitting the market. So go through a little bit of alphabet soup here because it's somewhat confusing. There's all these different ways of powering your car. So there's the traditional internal combustion engine that's powered by gasoline. We all know about that. And then there's the hybrid vehicles. So think the classic Toyota Prius. All the energy to make the car go ultimately is derived from gasoline, but there's a small battery on board. The gas engine charges the battery, and the car uses the battery for some of its propulsion. So it's a more efficient way of using the gas. And then there's the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. This is similar to Tim's Volt. So the car has a plug. You could charge up the battery. It can run on all battery power up to a certain point. And then after that, there is a gasoline engine that then kicks in to charge the battery to enable the car to continue to go. And then finally, we have the battery electric vehicles, similar to what I drive. So all the power ultimately comes from electricity, has a bigger battery. And today we're just going to be talking about the cars on the right side, the ones with the plugs. So again, just to go into a little more detail, the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, they can run on electricity or on internal combustion, but their primary source is electricity, ideally. And the internal combustion kicks in when the battery runs low. When it's on battery only, It has 0 tailpipe emissions, but since it has the gas engine in there, it alleviates this phenomenon of range anxiety. The battery typically will have a good warranty on there. And in this category, you think of the Chevy Volt, the Chrysler Pacifica van that I described. There's a whole bunch. Toyota RAV4 is coming out in a plug-in hybrid, the Ford Escape. There's a Prius version of that, a whole bunch of cars in this category. And then there's the fully electric, the battery electric vehicle, where all the energy to make the car go comes from electricity. And these have a range of 150 to 400 plus miles, 0 tailpipe emissions. They're extremely quiet, almost no maintenance, good warranties on the battery. And in this category, think of cars like the Tesla, the Nissan Leaf, the Chevy Bolt, the Audi e-tron, and again, many, many more options in this category coming over the next couple of years.
So the next thing we want to just give you a picture of, a lot of people say to me, is this really happening? And I've been paying attention to it for a while. And we now have 1.8 million in the US and growing. And the graph basically shows that the prediction of Bloomberg is by 2040, EV sales, new cars, will be more than internal combustion engine sales. This is for passenger vehicles. And the yellow line here is basically showing the percent EV as a function of time. So essentially, we're going to be moving quickly towards more electric vehicles. That's driven not only by the desirability of the, from a sustainability standpoint, there's a lot of policies that are driving it, and there are several major cities and countries that are going to eliminate internal combustion engines in their cities and possibly in their countries from a manufacturing perspective. So the market is moving this direction in many parts of the world. Another thing that often comes up is, well, what EV should I buy? And there's a good resource out called PlugStar. There's some other ones that we've got some links to, but this is kind of a fun one. Basically, it shows you a map of the price and the total range. And then you have these other features over here. What's your budget, type of vehicle, number of seats, the fuel, all electric or plug-in, range and location. And just to give you an example, in this case, the filters are, we'll look at all of them. But as soon as you go and, I picked my zip code and I've said, I just want a sedan, coupe, minivan, or hatchback, all electric, there's a lot fewer choices in this zip code. And that's something that is changing over time. But if, for example, I wanted to see what the Tesla Model 3, it gives you this information. It also, when you select it, it'll drill down to give you more data on availability and other features of that particular vehicle. And you can do it for all the vehicles. You can select electric range only versus total range, which is different between the plug-in hybrids and the battery electric. So it's kind of a nice place to get an idea of what's out there, how much, and availability. So this is how the filters are inputted. Go ahead, Jade.
Yeah, so what's the holdup here? Electric cars, we know they're better for the environment, they're better to drive. Well, there's a lot of myths and there are challenges out there as well. And we'll go through each of these. So the main myths that people always are concerned about is range, cost, performance or reliability of the cars. And then legitimate challenges are just people aren't aware enough that these are good options. They're not available in all areas. And charging at home can be a challenge for people depending on their situation. A great source for general electric vehicle information that goes through a lot of this is a website called normalnow, normalnow.com. So you can check that out at some point. Yeah, so the myths, you want to take this, Tim?
Sure. So range anxiety back 7, 8 years ago was a real concern because the battery electrics may be rated at 100 miles, and in the cold, they could maybe only go 70 miles. And so you had to plan accordingly. But now you can get a lot more miles out of a given vehicle. So they've changed on the electric vehicles. And also 95% of people who have EVs charge at home. And 80% of them only drive fewer than 40 miles a day. So it's not a lot of electricity you need, and it's not a lot of range you need. There's also a fast charging network that's growing rapidly. There's plenty now, but there's more coming. And these, like on a Tesla supercharger, you get 175 miles of range in 15 minutes. And those numbers are going up. Another thing, there's been talk about, you need to have chargers everywhere. Well, you really need them where you need them. You need them at places where you might stay overnight, like a hotel. You need them along interstates. Having them in public stations is a good draw if you're using that retail location. But the fact that most people have other places to charge, you don't have to have them everywhere, but it's a good retail draw. Also, if you're driving an EV, it's kind of a new behavior. You have to start thinking about where you're going, where the charging is, how many miles you can take. But once you start driving an EV, you figure it out pretty quickly. And then again, the charging ubiquity is on its way. And we'll talk about, there's a lot of plans in the works at the national state level to improve that. One of the things that, as I mentioned just a second ago, when the first EVs came out, they had a smaller battery energy capacity. They like the Nissan Leaf used to have about a 100-mile range. The new Leafs have like 250. So you can go a lot further without being concerned about recharging on the newer battery electrics. Having a plug-in hybrid, as Jay mentioned earlier, you don't worry about it because you've got gasoline to keep you going. You can always refill. The other thing on range is what they call the 3 T's, temperature being the most significant one. This graph over here is basically saying on an 80-degree day, you'll get 100% of the maximum range. So it's taking the easy math and saying that's 100 miles. On a 0-degree day, you'll only get 60 miles of range. So that's the impact of temperature. When the batteries are colder, they don't use the energy as efficiently. So that's something drivers quickly learn in the winter. Technique and terrain, much like an internal combustion engine. If you do jackrabbit starts at intersections and you accelerate, hit the gas or the pedal heavily, you're going to use energy more quickly. And same thing, terrain, rougher, more hills is going to consume energy faster. Another thing that's important to understand is the charging levels. So in the world of EV charging, they call it electric vehicle supply equipment, or EVSE is kind of the moniker for an EV charging station. And if you look in the National Electric Code, they'll be talking about EVSE. So I think it's a term that might be helpful for this group. So there's 3 levels, 1, 2, and 3. 1 is basically household current, 110 volt AC. And the way the levels are, they're based on voltage and amperage. So the amperage determines the power. So on a level 1, you're looking at 1 or 2 kilowatts of power, which gives you, when you're connected, about 3 to 6 range miles per hour connected. And that's typically something you might use at home or when you're on the road. And this is, you have the mobile ones that you can plug in to most outlets as long as they're rated for the amperage of your car, which is typically 16 amps. Level 2 is the common ones we see out in public. They basically are quite a bit more power, 6 to 20 kilowatts, and typically 25 to 30 range miles per hour. And these are the ones you can have them in your home garage. A lot of public chargers or even private chargers are using this. And so, if you're driving 40 miles a day, 25 to 30 range miles per hour, you're recharged in less than 2 hours. Level 3 are also called DC fast chargers, or DCFCs. They're typically 480 volt, 3-phase or higher. And the reason they're called DC fast charging is, unlike level 1 and level 2, the level 1 and level 2, you're putting AC into the car, where it's converted to DC and then charges the battery. On level 3, the AC is done, conversion is done in, AC to DC is done in the charging station. So the output of the device is DC. And now we're looking at 50 to 150 kilowatts and up. They're now talking about 1 megawatt chargers, but for a bus fleet or a trucking fleet, you might have 350 or 400 or 500. And for these 50 to 100, you're looking at 50 to 200 range miles per hour. And this is used for retail electric charging for fleets, and these highways, the interstates, are looking to set up this network. And the other question always comes up is how long does it take to charge? I've kind of alluded to that. So the level 1, if you want to put 80 miles in a battery overnight, it's going to take you 16 hours with a level 1. Take you 3.5 hours on a level 2 and a half an hour on a level 3. This just gives you the picture of, the importance of the 3 levels. The other thing that's different between electric vehicles and other vehicles is they've really taken advantage of kind of the Internet of Things. These are some examples of site, charger locators, U.S. Department of Energy Alternative Fuel Data Center, ChargePoint, PlugShare, and even Google Maps. You pull that up and you just, say or type in EV charger near me and it'll fill them in for you. There's also this is a set of links to these sites. If you're interested, we're going to post this PowerPoint and the links will be live there. The other thing is there's all the smart devices can access this, and some of the dashboards, this being Tesla, has real-time access to these maps as well. The point being that if you're looking for a station, the vehicle knows where it is, or your phone knows where it is, and you type in one of these maps and it'll tell you where it is. Some of them will tell you if there's an available one. Some of them you can reserve. So they're really taking advantage of the Internet. Want to show you an example of the PlugShare. So this is one of the ones I showed. This basically, you type in a location and it'll pop up. In this case, it populated all the EV chargers in our part of the world here. And I went and created a filter for the zip code. So that'll, it'll put it, center it around the zip code. But there's these filters, so you can determine what type of plugs, the minimum power, and which network. So you may only want to, maybe you're loyal to ChargePoint or Blink or EVgo, and you can isolate those in here. So if you want to do the power, so if you're looking for a high power DC fast charger, this will quickly filter down to those, in your search criteria. And then in a similar way, on the vehicle, so the American cars can take what's called a J1772 connection for level 2, and for level 3, it's called a CCS, which is combined charging system, which actually has the level 1 and level 2 combined, or a CHAdeMO, which is for Japanese cars. And then you've got supercharger for Tesla. So you'll know which one you have for your vehicle, and it allows you to pick that, and again, isolate on this map where available chargers are for your particular needs.
All right, great, thanks, Tim. So another myth is cost. People have this conception that the only EVs out there are Teslas, and yeah, Teslas can be quite expensive, but you can get a new Chevy Bolt or a new Nissan Leaf for around $30,000. And there's a growing used market. You can get Chevy Bolt plug-in hybrids, you can get used Nissan Leafs, and some of the older Leafs you can get for under $10,000. And the key thing to realize here is up front, some of these do cost more than comparable cars, but the overall cost of ownership is much less. And that's chiefly because of lower maintenance costs. Again, there's not much maintenance that you have to do other than rotating the tires, but also lower fuel costs. So if you take a look at the graphic here, the cost to go 25 miles, if you're in a Tesla Model 3, you only need 76 cents of electricity. But take a comparable size car, which is fairly efficient, the Toyota Camry, that same 25-mile journey will cost you roughly 3 times as much. So you can see over the lifetime of a car that this really makes a big difference.
So just to put that in a similar perspective, Ford did a study. They have 4 different similar products on the same chassis platform: the Fusion internal combustion engine, the Fusion hybrid electric, the Fusion all electric, and the Ford Energy plug-in hybrid. And so you can see annual fuel cost based on 15,000 miles a year and 12 cents per kilowatt hour compared to $2.94 a gallon. So on an all electric, you're spending under $500 for 15,000 miles, and it's $1,800 for the internal combustion engine. So that's $1,300 a year you would save in fuel costs. And that's a typical number. Gasoline's a little lower now, but the effect is much the same. Another thing, kind of before we get into some of the other cost factors, there are some incentives available at the federal level and the Illinois level that are important to know about. So if you buy an EV now, you get a 75 up to a $7,500 tax credit, and that's what they've set it up to. So every manufacturer of EVs gets to do that for their first 200,000 vehicles. And for example, Chevy and Tesla have exceeded those numbers, and so they no longer are eligible for the tax credit. But there are bills in the Congress that are trying to extend the time frame on this, as well as change that from 200,000 to 600,000. It's been a very effective program, and chances are, I think, are reasonable it will be extended, because now in effect it's a penalty for a Chevy or a Tesla that the other vendors get. There's also, if you install an EV charger in your home or your business, there's a total install cost tax credit of 30%. So if it costs $5,000 to install a charger, you'll get a $1,500 tax credit. Or did I do that right? Yeah. And in Illinois, the state of Illinois has approved $80 million in incentives to support EV infrastructure. They did this in 2019. It's under the IEPA's control, Illinois Environmental Protection, and they have not yet decided how they're going to allocate it, but it is out there, and we hope soon it will be applied. And for those that are interested, there's a link here to this alternative fuel data center, something called Illinois Laws and Incentives, and it's a list of about 20 different related laws and incentives. These are sort of the big ones. The other big thing is this concept of cost parity. So what cost parity means is, at some point in time, an electric vehicle will cost the same as an internal combustion engine vehicle. And just to put it into perspective, the biggest factor is the battery cost. So if you think about the vehicle, most of it is the same except for the battery. And if you're comparing a battery electric against internal combustion, you're moving from a combustion engine to basically electric motor. And so the dollar per kilowatt hour is driving the higher cost of the EV. So back in 2010, it was about $620 per kilowatt hour. And now we're down around $200. And the concept is, when we reach this point of cost parity of, to say, this $150, which they're saying could happen in the next 3, 4, 5 years, EVs will start costing less. So you can imagine what will happen if you go to the store to buy a car and the EV costs less, and it costs you know, a quarter or a third to operate. It gets to be very attractive. And so this is the game changer when we reach cost parity.
All right, thanks. And next myth, you know, concerns about performance or reliability. Well, as I mentioned, in my opinion, the performance of electric vehicles is far better than internal combustion engines. They're faster, they're quieter, they're smoother, and they handle better. And they're more fun to drive than internal combustion. Really, the key is just getting behind the wheel and taking a test drive. But I think that's going to sell the car perhaps, you know, just as well as anything Tim or I will say today. But in terms of reliability, I could tell you from personal experience, and the worst of the polar vortexes, no issues with starting. The range does shrink quite a bit when it's well below zero, but it still does the job. And in terms of reliability, you know, there's something like 10% of the moving parts in an EV compared to an internal combustion engine. So there's just a whole lot less that's going to go wrong. And the batteries are quite reliable. It's not the same as like a battery in your cell phone, which starts to decline after a couple years. Newer EVs, they've found, will retain over 80% of their battery capacity at 160,000 miles on the odometer. So, you know, that's unlikely to be an issue.
I would also add that, you know, they've been out now since 2009, effectively, this generation of EVs, and they've had some learning curves, some bumps in the road, but they've fixed them. I mean, the early Nissan Leafs, there was some complaining out there. You don't hear those things anymore because they've, you know, reinvested in innovation and they fixed the problem. So it's robust these days. One of the big things that comes up that's important to talk about is the battery life. It's so central to the vehicle. And I just want to give some sense of what's important, because as an EV owner, you have to pay attention to battery life. The life decreases as a function of the number of times you charge it and discharge it. So just like a cell phone or a computer, life is impacted because basically the chemistry is being cycled. And you can influence that. And there's something called depth of charge and state of charge, which this drawing is showing. If you have an EV and you charge it 100% every time you fill it up, and you discharge it to 0% every time you use it, you'll impact the battery life negatively. So what they recommend is to do something like you can actually adjust it on the vehicle and say, I don't want to go any higher than 80%, and I want to refill when I get to 20%. And if you follow this, you'll extend the battery life and you'll get more life out of the battery. The other thing is, if you were to kind of a most extreme case, if you charge on a fast charger 100% and discharge to empty every time you use your vehicle, compared to using a level 2, which is a lower power, you would have less life. So the idea is that you kind of optimize the balance of charging with level 2 versus level 3, and you manage this rate of charging or range of charging smartly. The other thing that's happening in a big way, there's a lot of R&D investments, federal level around the world in battery design. The materials are improving. They're trying so many different things. This is just an area that's going to be markedly different as each year passes. Some of the problems we're having today or challenges with life are going to start going away with R&D. Another thing that's really important is the battery temperature relative to ambient. So from a battery life perspective, if you're getting in the car on a hot day, you want to cool it, you want to heat it on a cold day. And so you do that with what's called battery thermal management systems. When EVs first came out, they didn't really have these, and now they all have these. And they have different flavors to basically control it so that it extends the life of the battery. You're not having these thermal shocks from extreme cold and extreme hot. And if you can preheat the battery, for example, you can get more miles out of it. So some of the technologies allow the battery to warm up before you get in the car. There are batteries that they claim that will be out shortly that can get 1 million miles in the life of a battery. So you can see where it's heading on the battery, and this is another part of the game changer.
So next challenge is education. Well, I guess this is our first challenge. So legit challenge here is education and awareness. Fact is, people just don't know enough about electric vehicles. They don't realize that they're here, they're ready for prime time, and they're completely viable. So to meet that challenge, that's kind of what we're doing here today. That's what I've been doing with this group also called Plug in America, doing electric vehicle shows. But a lot of this work is going to be done by the car manufacturers as well. You may have seen during the Super Bowl, GM had a commercial with Will Ferrell promoting their commitment to electric vehicles. Ford similarly has been doing some electric vehicle advertising on TV. So this is all going to be coming, but there's a lot of other good resources here that you should check out. And Tim, you'll explain some of those?
Yeah, so I just realized Drive Electric Week's in there twice, but it's something that this group Plug in America was doing religiously in concert with a lot of other groups to have the ride and drive and other types of shows to allow people to sit in electric vehicles. It's slowed down a bit amongst COVID, but this is something that will come back to life. Similarly, the Chicago Area Clean Cities, which is a US DOE outreach group, they do an annual green drives where they bring 25 to 30 different vehicles, and you can get in them and drive them. And so that's kind of, as Jay was saying earlier, if you drive these things, there's a wow factor. Also, there's been various local programs. I know Sierra Club, we did an event where there was a climate change thing, but we had EVs there. Peter Gore was there with his car. and Go Green groups, and so there's local action that you might find in a local paper or whatever. There's also some tools out there on websites. So ComEd is really making a significant investment in EV education. So they've got one of their pages called EV Smart. It kind of walks you through what you can think as a consumer, but also kind of their perspective. The Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, which for those who don't know, is kind of an association of metropolitan areas. They've got 275 municipalities in their group. I was involved in a project last year called Becoming EV Ready, where we've basically set up a program and some planning tools to help municipalities get to be EV ready. I mentioned that at the top, and there's some documents that this can lead you to if you're interested. And then Jay mentioned earlier, normalnow.com. It's a nice thing at a kind of a starter level to walk you through the EVs, the costs, all the basic questions that you would ask. So it's a good place if you're thinking about an EV.
Next challenge is availability. Now, there's a wide variability of what EVs are available from state to state. If you're out in California, you have a lot more options than you do, say, in Wyoming. And a big reason for this is there's legislation in a lot of the states for, it's called zero emission vehicle or ZEV legislation. And basically this mandates that manufacturers sell a certain number of vehicles in that state that are considered zero emission vehicles. So that's been a political tool that's really been helpful to drive the availability of this kind of car or truck in different parts of the country. Now in Illinois, Teslas, Chevy Bolts, and Nissan Leafs are readily available. Others are a little harder to find, but this is changing. And as the manufacturers are expanding their offerings and putting actual money into selling these vehicles, I think we're going to be seeing more and more out there. But an action item I'd encourage all you to consider doing is to call your local dealerships and just ask about EVs. Call the Ford dealer, say, hey, are you having any of the plug-in escapes? When are you getting that new electric Mustang? So the more the dealerships hear from consumers, the more likely they are to actually stock a variety of them.
Yeah, I also know that I've been getting a lot of ads for the new Bolt. It's kind of an SUV Bolt or a what do they call a hatchback Bolt. It's a little different than what you have, Jay.
Yeah.
And once you get on those, you hear, if you reach out to a given dealer, they'll give you all the blurbs if you want them on your email list. So. Kind of expanding on what Jay was just saying, there's just so many more vehicles coming. Rivian, which is Bloomington, Illinois manufacturing site, they're next year going to have a 500-mile, basically it's like a Jeep, which is amazing. GM has got 30 models planned by 2025 that are all electric. They're going to end production of gas and diesel by 2035. Ford announced $22 billion. And Toyota is aiming for 40% of U.S. sales by 2025. And this is just it's a representation. So we're here, last year there were 58 EV models, and that's, like in the U.S., not necessarily in Illinois. Next year, it's going to be 132. So, and the number of the different flavors here is growing. And at the same time, Jay mentioned there's 5 pickup models on the table that are going to be out this year or next year. There are larger electric trucks that are coming as well, but it's a good time to start thinking about this because availability of different flavors and the costs are coming down and there's still incentives. So the other challenge is, to home charge, how do you do that? Should you invest or you just kind of go with the level 1? I mentioned the levels before. This yellow thing here is basically, it comes with the car, and this is where you get this 3 to 6 range miles per hour connected. The decision, and so you really don't have to spend any money unless you have to put in a bigger amperage circuit. But most people, if they're going with a battery electric, you're going to want to probably have a 240 volt AC. And they've got some fairly low, probably simple ones, standard ones that just safely charge. I've got other ones that are smart where they have Wi-Fi or cell connection. so they can talk to the cloud or your local computer. You're typically talking about $500 a charger and $500 to $2,000 to do the installation, which is basically running conduit wiring from your garage to your circuit breaker panel. You can apply the 30% federal income tax credit. You get the 25 to 35 range miles. The other thing is, the cost of electricity, ComEd is about 13 cents a kilowatt hour, but if you get into hourly pricing, which I've done, if you charge at night, you might pay 2 or 3 cents or less per kilowatt hour, so you can save money.
I've been paid to charge overnight. In fact, occasionally the price will go below zero.
You are a lucky man. So a big challenge, and I don't know how many of you live in apartments or condos, are the multi-unit dwellings. The cost of a level 2 can be a lot higher because you've got to run conduit and wire potentially a long distance. And so these are typical quotes for an EV. You still can get the federal income tax credits. Depending what happens in upcoming legislation, there may be some support for this.
And I would just mention, for people who live in multi-unit housing or it just may be cost prohibitive to install charging there, a good option is workplace charging. So if you can get your employer to install chargers, that's a place where your car might be sitting for 8 hours on a daily basis. That workplace charging can really move the needle and let a lot of people get into EVs quite easily.
So in my business life, I spend a lot of time in condominiums quoting EV charging installations. And there are inevitably EV drivers, and even if they don't have chargers, they'll find a local Whole Foods or somebody who's got a charger, and they'll charge up because they don't drive that many miles, so they can still have an EV charger, find a local public charger, and it works for them. But if I'm in those buildings, it typically means they want to have one at their space. So, and then they look at these numbers and some bite on it, some don't.
Yeah. So we've been kind of alluding to this PV for EVs, photovoltaic for electric vehicles. So I think fair to say most people who are in the Zoom with ISEA understand that solar energy is probably the best way to make electricity out there. But combining solar with electric vehicles helps to further reduce the cost of ownership of the panels and shorten cost of ownership of the car and shorten the payoff period for the solar. And it can also, eventually serve as an energy storage. But if you don't really pair your electric vehicle with clean renewable energy, then your lovely Chevy Bolt is, perhaps a coal or a natural gas powered car. But when you got solar on your roof, you're really driving on sunshine. And then if you combine time of day pricing with your solar, so in essence, you're exporting excess electrons to the grid during the daytime when electricity is most expensive. And if you charge at night, that's when electric rates are at their lowest with time of day pricing. So you can really kind of leverage your solar panels to be even more economically efficient for you. So it's a great pairing.
The best of all worlds. So at this point, we want to kind of look a little bit to the future. There's some cause for optimism, at least in my estimation. The Biden plan has made some announcements, and they're talking about supporting 500,000 EV chargers. And that's in concert with what they call the National Corridor Programs, which is basically interstate EV chargers. The details are not out on this. This is a 30,000 foot goal, but the idea is to develop this ubiquitous network of fast chargers primarily, but also level 2, so that people can get around the country in electric vehicles without range anxiety. There's also a commitment that the federal procurement will be 100% clean vehicles, including zero emission vehicles. Illinois has made some similar announcements. The governor last summer came out with a statement on transportation goals. They wanted to encourage 750,000 EVs in the state by 2030. That's just all procurement, and they want to support it with state procurement of clean vehicles, including ZEVs. with a target of carbon neutrality by 2050. And a big part of this is to integrate renewables, energy efficiency, and transportation electrification. And I also should throw in energy storage in there. But these are the visions. And a couple of concepts that are important, I think, for this group in particular. One is managed charging. So the idea is somebody is going to control what goes into or out of the battery in your EV as a function of time of day. And basically, it's part of a demand response management solution. So as the grid demands more, it can draw from batteries. As at night, when it may be able to draw from the batteries and not have to turn on power plants, reducing grid costs and grid operational costs. And they do that through what's called things like V2G, is vehicle to grid. One way, you can go both ways, or you can go one way, which is kind of what it is already, where you can feed electrons to the grid, or you can get electrons from the grid. You also have vehicle to business, vehicle to home. Most people in Chicagoland have the automated meter interface, smart meters. And so these are basically kind of the data managers talking to the internet and then basically working with the facilities they're connected to. So the idea is that there will be some third party, possibly the utility, that will actually regulate this. They'll turn things on, they'll tell which direction to flow. And this would be with lots of EVs. And the whole idea would be demand based. And related to that is kind of what I call the energy ecosystem. So you have distributed energy like renewables, so solar, and now battery electric becomes part of that distribution system. Think about a mini power plant combined with a rooftop solar, and you have these vehicle grid integration controls, talking through the smart meters, and also interfacing with stationary energy systems. So these could be large scale energy storage systems that can hold on to solar electrons, during the day, interfacing with the grid. The idea is it's somehow managed and optimized so that you're reducing the number of power plants you need to operate. So it's all kind of falls under the moniker of what's called beneficial electrification, which is something that I think the market generally should strive for, which basically you're reducing operational costs, and it'll actually end up, if you participate in this, it will cost you less per kilowatt or kilowatt hour to charge your battery because you're a participant. But at the same time, you'll get positive environmental outcomes because you're using solar and you're using EVs. So this is the direction the world's heading. And I would even think that in some of your solar businesses that, this is something to pay attention to, you might want to integrate.
All right, so kind of to summarize here, a to-do list. Really encourage you to test drive an EV before your next purchase. Again, getting behind the wheel, there's really no substitute for the driving experience. Call dealers to ask about EV availability, talk to your employer about workplace charging, and contact your elected leaders and let them know you support incentives and policies to help Illinois transition to the clean energy economy with solar power and electric vehicles.
Last thing, I'll just let you know, these are some of the sites that if you're serious about an EV, this will tell you about the types and tell you about stuff you can get in Illinois. This is for some used EVs, and then some discussions on how to assess the total true cost of ownership.
All right, and a reminder, the easiest way to get an EV is just to win the ISEA raffle. It's probably the cheapest EV out there, the $100 Tesla Model X. So encourage you all to buy a ticket, win that Tesla. And we thank you very much for your attention. And I think at this point, if anyone has any questions you want to pop up in the chat, we'll be happy to do our best to answer those.
Yeah, we've got a few questions already. One of which you already addressed a little bit, but Chris was interested to know what, for Jay specifically, with pure EV cars, have you observed any differences in performance or behavior in extreme cold weather?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing that you notice with the weather is the range difference, right? So on nice summer days, not too hot, my car can do 300 miles on a full battery. And in the winter, it'll be under 200. Now, that doesn't really factor into my daily living because in general, I don't really drive more than 50 miles a day. But if I was planning to do a road trip in the winter time, that's a little dicey. If you have to, blast the heater and it's really cold, the range is something you definitely need to pay attention to. But for my driving habits, that's really about it. I'll say one other thing about driving an EV is most of them will have what's called regenerative braking, where basically you press the accelerator, and if you want to slow down, you just ease off the accelerator, and the vehicle transfers the kinetic energy of motion back into the battery, and in doing so, it slows down. So it's very rare that I actually have to press the brakes. And since you don't press the brakes, you don't really have the risk, I guess, as much of locking the tires up and sliding around. So with all the snow that we've had the last couple of weeks, I feel very comfortable driving my EV around in it.
Jeff wants to know if you're installing a level 2 charger, is that a potential issue for local distribution lines and transformers? And would an electric utility company need to get involved beyond the usual permit requirements?
Typically not. So it depends on the panel you have in your, let's say, your basement or garage. If you're maxed out on that panel, so if you have 100 amp service and getting an EV charger will put you over that, you'll have to increase your service. Most people I run into, they have enough for a 40 amp breaker, which is what you would need for a level 2. If you exceed it, then this is a common practice for electricians too. So if somebody puts in an air conditioner or an electric dryer, people have to put in bigger service. So you may have to run a different line to the pole, and the installer would have to interact with the utility as normal. For single homes or for 1 or 2 installations, it's typically not an issue. If you, like I'm dealing with these condo buildings where they want to put in 10 or 20 chargers, you may have to call ComEd and they may have to run service. But for a typical homeowner, you may have to increase the panel size and that's it.
Great. Robin wants to know if you have 2 EVs, would you need 2 chargers or would you be able to get away with just 1?
Depends on how well the married couple gets along. It boils down to how many hours of charging per day you have. There are, I've put in chargers where the married couple is, they have 2 parking spaces next to each other and they share a charger and they work it out. I've had other ones that say, I want my own. So, but you can definitely do it. The chargers are standard. It's just a question of how long you need to have that charger with whom you're sharing.
And then she also wants to know with level 2 home charging, once the battery is 100% charged, does it stop drawing electricity from the house?
Yes, it's automatic.
Great. I think we've got a few. Kevin wants to know if he wins the raffle, do I get my choice of color? Yes, the raffle pays for a basic model and you get to make the modifications that you would like. D. Booker wants to know, what is the tax on the Tesla when you win? I think I am not entirely sure. The raffle rules are on the website, and those will detail what the taxes are. Oh, yep, I see Leslie has answered some of the questions about the raffle there that were asked. Lisa wants to know, does that weather calculation change if the car was not in a garage overnight? Does that compound the issue?
Yeah, I think, as Tim was saying, we ideally want to make our cold batteries warm and our really hot batteries cool. So if you can keep your car in a heated garage, then when you're starting off, the batteries are going to be at a much warmer temperature than they would be if they were sitting outside overnight. So yeah, that would make a difference, I would think.
Yeah, I think in terms of how long it would take to charge, it probably wouldn't impact it, but how many miles, you'd get fewer because you're colder.
Great. And Bill would like to know, does the motor require scheduled maintenance?
You know, for my car, it's a tire rotation every 7,500 miles, and then I think, you know, you replace the cabin air filter, and you know, my leases are only through 36,000 miles, so beyond that, I'm not really sure. But there's nothing involving maintenance beyond that within the first 36,000 miles. Tim, do you know anything else about that?
Well, you know, I've had a plug-in hybrid since 2014, and I do oil changes probably every 10,000 miles, which means I've changed I think twice, 3 times maybe. And the spark plugs haven't been touched. I have had some emissions problems with the gasoline engine, you know, so I mean, if I buy another EV, it's going to be a battery electric. I just want to do away with the combustion system, because I've had a few problems, and that's where they've been.
Great. That is all the questions we have at the moment. But if you have any that you're thinking about, please type them into the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer those for you. In the meantime, I just want to mention that this webinar has been recorded and will be up on YouTube probably tomorrow. And I will be sending out a link to that along with the slides from this presentation to everyone who registered. So if you're worried about remembering those links, you will have them in that email. And thank you so much to Jay and Tim for an excellent presentation, and to all of our lovely audience members for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.